Hi, everybody. We are now on skill of the week number 11. This week is focus and self-monitoring. This is actually going to be a two-part series. So this is focus and self-monitoring number 1. So these two ideas, focus and self-monitoring, go hand in hand. They are directly connected. I want you to think about them as one being very reliant on the other. So one of these terms you might be familiar with, maybe you're familiar with both. We're going to talk a little bit more about them today. Question: what techniques do you use to help you focus? So think of a time when you had to do something that required focus. This can be related to school or out of school. So what did you do to help yourself? Follow-up question is, when is it easier for you to focus? I want you to think of what kind of headspace do you have to be in? What kind of environment is really helpful for you? What do you need to be working with in order to help yourself focus? When is it easiest for you to focus? Okay, on to self-monitoring, excuse me. So probably have a good idea of what it means to focus, a word that you're probably familiar with, but this term, self-monitoring, might be new to you. So what do you think it means? Try to break down the term itself. Self-monitor. What do you think it means? So self-monitoring, we have a lot of things here. So it's basically a skill related to tracking your actions and performance. I like to think of it as a self-check-in. It's a series of assessments you make along the way. You do this all the time, all day long, even for the simplest things. Okay? So fancy way for you to say, keep track of what you're doing. And like I said, you do this all the time, even when you're making breakfast. So maybe you're making eggs. You look at the pan to see if the butter melted in the pan before adding eggs. You're checking in on what you're doing. What's next? How did the last step go? You might remember the eggs were a little runny last time. So you might think, what do I need to do differently this time? Again, kind of monitoring yourself in the steps. So believe it or not, this skill also applies to learning. And obviously when it comes to learning, it gets a little more complex. So when it relates to basic learning, how does self-monitoring relate to basic learning? Well, it helps us learn new skills, helps us understand instructions, keeping track of due dates, checking work, relates to math, how we stop and think to look for clues in the instructions. We use self-monitoring to figure out best way to solve, ask ourselves questions. Should I try this method or that method? You might use it to determine if the answer makes sense. It's a self-check in like, does my outcome actually make sense given the problem? And it can help cue you to check the answers. What's my next step now? Making sure all steps are complete. It also relates to reading. So you might ask yourself a lot of questions while you're reading. Do I understand what I read? Do I need to look up any of the words or ask for help? Can I connect what I just read to anything that I've learned or anything that I already know? So asking yourself questions while you're reading is also a way of monitoring your reading. As the picture indicates that I have for you here, it involves honesty and reflection to really know whether you're doing this or not. I can't get inside your head. Only you are really there with you. So knowing that you're self-monitoring is a question that will require honesty and reflection. So how do focus and self-monitoring connect? I want you to stop and think about that. So how do you think focus and self-monitoring connect based on what you know about focus and what I just told you about self-monitoring? So maybe you have something like this. Self-monitoring allows you to stop and think. It helps you to understand, engage your understanding, and to make choices about what to do. So it helps us recognize when we're off task. Like when you've been staring at your phone, just 30 minutes go by and you haven't even noticed, that probably means you're not really monitoring yourself. Or are you pretty good at being like, oh gosh, I picked up my phone, let me put it back down. It helps us recognize when we're misunderstanding something. Do you go over the instructions? Do you ask yourself, do I actually know what I need to do first? It helps us understand when we need to refocus. It helps us understand how we need to refocus. It helps us understand what resources we need to use. So focus and self-monitoring are connected because self-monitoring really allows us to focus. It gives us the tools to make checks along the way so that we can maintain our focus through using like motivation tools, focus tools, resources around us. So a simple rule with just about anything is that in order to develop solutions, you have to first know the problem. So we talked about knowing oneself in our lesson on motivation, and it is true again here. So it is really important to honestly assess these areas. You are the driver of your learning, especially at this age. You really are the person who is going to decide whether they are going to dive in and engage fully with learning something, or if you're going to kind of take a back seat and wait for something to happen. Lifelong learning is something you might think about or hear about. And that's really part of this one executive functioning skill, self-monitoring. So it's really important before we get to talking about strategies that you understand where it is you may have areas for growth. Next week, we will focus on the strategies. That will be our part 2. So for this week, I really want us to work on that assessment. You'll see I have a document here, but this is going to be our skill of the week. And this is our part 1. Next week, like I said, will be part 2. So instructions here. And this is really about ways to reflect in order to eventually optimize your attention during your work time. So the first step is going to be identifying patterns of behaviors and actions. And we're going to do a self-monitoring attention check. So you're going to do this exercise 2 to 3 times. I suggest you try different classes, different times of day, and also try to do it when you're in a structured space like class versus independent work time, homework time, etc. So you'll set a timer for 5-minute intervals, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes to assess your focus. And when that timer goes off, I want you to just simply check in. Am I focused on the task at hand? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And you can just type in yes, type in no. And you're going to do that several times, 2 to 3 times next week or this upcoming week, depending on when you're doing this video. Step 2, I want you to look at how many of those 15 times you were on task. Give me the percentage. Take the number divided by 15. And list the sort of things that positively and negatively influence your attention. This is, again, knowing yourself, right? What factors increase your attention and productivity? What factors may get in the way? Step 3 is reflection on signs that you may be off task. So what are things that you may know about yourself that may be self-checks for you to prompt yourself to refocus? Do you begin fidgeting? Do you start looking at the wall? Do you start daydreaming? You're just thinking about something completely different? Are you reading and then realize 3 paragraphs have gone by and I don't even know what I just read. I need to reread. Are you unable to solve the problem? What else? Social media? Are you just talking to friends on the side, feeling bored? What is going on? What are these signs that your attention is drifting? Think about this. It might be some of these that we've mentioned here. It might be more. So really think about this. I'd also like you to consider time. How long do you really need before you need a break? Like, when can you give like your maximum effort and say, okay, enough? What length of break is optional, right? Like, what are the kind of things that help you take a break? What is actually recharging for you so that you can return to the work? Remember, it's a break that you can return to work and focus. What time of day is best for you? All of this kind of stuff. Consider these questions. So list the things that help you, list the things to avoid, considering those questions above. Similarly, choose your work environment. What kind of work environment is really helpful for you? It's important to know yourself so that you can start to create these spaces for yourself as you move forward in your learning. And as just an adult, like when you're working at work, what things do you need? Okay, so questions here for you to consider again. Silence, background noise. Do you work better with people or independently? What kind of situation? And think about the context around you. What does that space look like? That is really helpful for you. So these are the things that I want you to consider for this week of self-monitoring.